Good day, everyone. My name is Sarah Johnson, and I'm the co-president and CEO of ProChange Behavior Solutions and a senior research fellow at Hero. And it's my pleasure and honor to be kicking off Think Tank today, where we'll be talking about listening as intervention. So we're delighted to be hearing from Wendy and the rest of our distinguished presenters today. But first, I have a very special privilege today, and that is to present the Mark Dundon Research Award. I think many of you who are not new to Hero knows that the Mark Dundon Research Award honors dedication and commitment to the field of health and well-being and acknowledges outstanding achievements in the area of research. And this year, by unanimous consensus of the Mark Dundon Research Award Committee, our recipient is Dr. Bruce Sherman. And I know that many of you know Bruce well, but we want to take a moment to celebrate his many accomplishments. Bruce is a workforce health and well-being consultant that's focused on optimizing investments in equitable workforce health and well-being. He's an adjunct professor in the Department of Public Health Education at UNC Greensboro and is a member of the faculty at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. He also serves as a medical advisor for the North Carolina Business Coalition on Health. Previously, Bruce served as the consulting corporate medical director for many large organizations, including Walmart, Whirlpool, and Goodyear. Bruce received his MD from NYU, his MA from Harvard, and his PsyD from Brown. His research interests are diverse and include the effects of racial and socioeconomic disparities on healthcare services use, and he has been a champion for strategies that lead to more equitable employee health benefits for many years. His studies have bolstered the business case for investments in workforce health, including a seminal article in Health Affairs that highlighted the difference in healthcare utilization and healthcare costs by employee wage category. His interest in health inequities has produced influential and wide-ranging peer-reviewed journal articles on workplace determinants of health, the unique health challenges of low-wage workers, and the implications of employee non-participation in well-being programs, as well as the importance of health equity in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So such important work in these challenging times. Bruce has collaborated with researchers from our nation's most renowned institutions, including the University of Michigan, University of Illinois, Chicago, Harvard University, and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And in addition to those numerous academic and research contributions, he's also known for his extraordinary blend of intellect and creativity, his relentless pursuit of excellence, and his remarkable humility. And in addition, he just exudes absolute kindness in every encounter he has with colleagues and collaborators. And that's true whether he's providing feedback on a manuscript or mentoring colleagues. And his dedication, innovation, and unwavering commitment to health equity have propelled the wellness field into new and important areas of scholarship. So we're just incredibly fortunate to have Bruce as a colleague and want to recognize and acknowledge that his personal and professional dedication to leadership in the field really truly exemplifies what the Mark Dundon Research Award seeks to honor. So I hope you'll all join me in celebrating Bruce. And if I had the award, I would hold it up. So let's pretend that I do. And I'm going to hand it over to Bruce for a few words.
No, thanks, Sarah. I'm so very, very honored and humbled to receive this recognition from Hero. I have a few brief comments to share with you. This award isn't just about me, it's about you and the value of the Hero community. I owe a great deal of gratitude to Hero in relation to my research career. Forums, committee conference calls have been important venues for me to share new research findings and elicit meaningful feedback that has really been invaluable in guiding the direction of my research. I've also had the great fortune to join several Hero members in research and writing collaborations. And from that perspective, I also want to share this award with all of you and appreciate so very much your fueling my passions. Speaking of passion, I owe a debt of gratitude to my family and friends for their patience and understanding for my commitment to this work. And I really hope that they'll view this award as some vindication for me regarding that commitment, which has been pretty excessive at times. I would be remiss if I didn't say something about health inequities. They're pervasive in our society, especially as the current administration appears to be creating a country of haves and have-nots. I hope that several of you are making or have already made a similar commitment to understand and mitigate some of the foundational drivers of inequities in health and well-being. I'll admit it's not flashy research, but it's especially meaningful to those who don't have the advantages that we all have. And it's vital that every one of us, have the opportunity to thrive. So I'll close with a quick invitation for those of you who have interest in promoting health equity. And as I enter into this next phase of my career, I welcome your outreach. I'm happy to become involved and support any health equity research efforts that you're planning on undertaking or are already undertaking. So thank you once again. I really appreciate the award.
Thank you, Bruce. It's very, very well deserved.
Congratulations, Bruce. I do have the award.
Oh, perfect.
It does exist. I joked with Bruce that I was scheming a publisher's clearinghouse type of door knock and surprise. We weren't able to quite pull that off, though it's fun to think about it happening. So, Bruce, I can't think of anyone more deserving of this award at this time. And I just really celebrate you and look forward to giving you a hug in person. Maybe next week I'll stop by with the actual award. We'll see how that goes.
Sounds great. Very kind of you, Karen. Thank you.
I want to say a thanks to my team for kicking this off while I hustled between Zoom rooms. There was no running involved, but it felt a little frantic. So thanks so much to Sarah and Bruce and Wendy and the MAISCOR team for getting us kicked off. It is my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Wendy Lynch. Wendy this year joined the HERO team as a senior education fellow. And when the theme of listening came on the agenda, truly, who else do you think of in this space other than Wendy Lynch to be able to do it? So we were thrilled when she said yes to the challenge and to the task. Wendy has dedicated almost 40 years to bridging the gap between complex analytics and business impact and is a respected educator, researcher, and consultant. She's built her career around the science and art of analytic translation, helping organizations to convert data into decisions and market success. She has multiple books. You can find them at the HERO Bookstore on listening and data analytics translation. And her career has spanned diverse environments, digital startups, academic medical centers, boardrooms, all giving her this really unique expertise and experience around unique language and priorities of both business and analytic teams. And of course, I must also comment on Wendy's accolade as the 2022 Bill Whitmer Leadership Award winner from HERO for her sustained contributions to corporate health and human capital analytics. Wendy, I cannot wait to get this think tank started. So it's over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for being here. We are virtual today, so our hugs and handshakes will need to be virtual too. But I hope that we will have an engaging and really inspiring day today. So that is my hope. So we are kicking off the fall 2025 think tank. We welcome everybody. Thank you for making the time. Hopefully some of you were able to join that couldn't join before. So we're very excited to have everybody here. As a little bit of background, we are thinking about listening today in an entire spectrum. So listening as intervention, meaning that it's not just something passive that you happen to do, but it is something that we are intentional about and that we respect the power of. And this encompasses an array of things, and I'll call it the little L, So you can listen by doing pulse surveys. You can listen by having a suggestion box. And a lot of companies say we listen and they do surveys. You can listen by doing a flyby agreement seeking statement, like you agree with that, right? And so little listening, little L, involves some of these things that they are part of it. But today we want to focus on listening the big L. The big L is something that is consistent. It is safe for people to do, that you give someone your full attention, that you're seeking to understand, and that you're confirming a person's value. So as we think about listening today, it's along this entire spectrum, but not limited to simply asking people questions on a survey. So I am joined today by a group of amazing contributors. And I'm going to just give you a little tidbit. We also have online their full bios. But our first presenter after me will be Diane Bergeron. And Dr. Bergeron is a trained social organizational psychologist, and she's a researcher for the Center for Creative Leadership. She has accomplished a tremendous amount of research, and her list of publications is extensive. She has focused on workplace listening. She's focused on women's leadership, workplace handling of grief and bereavement, and also some really interesting work in corporate citizenship, which I found really intriguing. Now, on the coolness and amazing factor, she had a choice earlier in her career. And that choice was, do I live my life in order to be awarded tenure in an academic business school? Or do I go sailing for 2 years? And she chose sailing. So she is somebody who values well-being, who values putting one's health and mindfulness first. So that is our first of the cool presenters that we have. Secondly, we have Sonia Looney, and she has a diverse background. She is a TEDx speaker. She has a master's in positive psychology. She focuses a lot on mattering and performance and reframing what success and achievement actually mean. She focuses on people who are high achievers and helping them not have burnout. And on the coolness and amazing factor, she is a world champion mountain biker. And she is the only woman to have completed the Yak Attack, which is a 10-day mountain bike endurance bike race over the world's tallest mountain pass in the Himalayas. And when you hear all about it, that was with some snow and losing the brakes on the bike. So there's a lot in that story. But thank you, Sonia, for being here and helping us understand performance and how listening fits in. And then our third contributor, who will focus on different ways of listening, is a senior health strategist and consultant with Hylant. Her background includes a study in public health, but she's also the founder of Experiments in Beautiful Thinking. And she believes that creative expression is one of the main ways that we connect with others and also with ourselves. On the coolness factor, she is an award-winning designer and artist. Her work has been featured across the globe. She will be featured in Iceland next year. She had a residency in Ireland. So she literally makes the world a more beautiful place with the things that she does. One of my favorites is her award-winning patterns for wallpaper. So here she is. So that is our group. We will start with me very quickly, and then we will get into these experts who will be providing a whole lot more for us to learn from and digest. So to begin, I want to talk about the Lower of Pissening and Healing Ferd. It's crimple but citical, Tekman not humanological. Si rannot we lie on zistant essage merveys or to row hispect and near each other lakes a middle tour. Now, be may we leave, there is toe 9. It's pot important, or that we mail dil But healing unfurred, mendimishes bell weeing, trower's lust, Perpins damformance, dundermines excess, and Bos's kernout. Van Kersley, a loss hubiscence, promotes Weenturk, lotivity, and proyalty. Taking lime to missen is one of the post-Maurful winter engines that me can wake. So, do te moinji by enlisting in your vesting skills and ache mother's heel furred. One more time. The Lower of Pissening and Healing Ferd. It's crimple, but also citical, Tekman, not hunological. Si rannot we lie on zinston essage, merveys, or to row he spect and near each other, lakes a middle tour. Be may we leave, there is toe 9. It's pot im Norton or we mail dil But healing unfurred, mendimishes bellweeing, trower's lust, Perpins damformance, sundermines excess, and Bos's kernout. Von Kersley, a loss hubiscence, promotes Weenturk, loductivity, and proyalty. Taking lime to missen is one of the post-Maurful winter engines me can wake. Do te moinji by enlisting in your vesting skills and ache mother's heel furred. Why would I do such a thing? Because it takes something abnormal out of the ordinary, different, for people to pay attention. If something is not usual, we're more likely to have them listen to us because things are stacked against us. I tell people that I teach a 6-week course on listening and asking good questions, and they can't imagine what you might do for 6 weeks. Because we listen all day, every day, all the time, and we hear or read 40,000 to 100,000 words a day. For those of us in business, if you love podcasts, it's probably more than that. There is a lot that we have to hear just to go through our daily lives. Now, we sent you yesterday, and no need to go get it or to look at it right this second, but we sent you a worksheet because today we would like you to think of a situation where you or someone else did not feel heard. Now, it could be that you're in a position now in your life where everyone listens to you, so you're not worried about it, but there has to be a situation that you can recall either earlier in your career where you weren't heard or somebody that you know that didn't feel heard. And I want you to think about it along this continuum. Completely unheard is a 1, completely heard is a 5. And I want you to think about that situation where you weren't heard. So just for a second, think about what that might be. So then during today's sessions, we don't need you to get into a lot of detail here, but we will be walking through things like, what was the situation where you weren't heard? Was there a specific setting? Were there signals that you knew you weren't heard? When you weren't heard, what was your impression of the people who didn't hear you? How did you know you weren't heard? How soon did you know you weren't heard? Did it have an impact on you? Did it have impact on your team? Does it affect your performance going forward? And were there other ways they could have listened to you? So again, this is not a intense worksheet that you fill out in extreme detail, but just be thinking as you listen to the content we cover today. Just be thinking about all of the factors that go into being heard or not being heard. I'm going to let everybody off the hook a little bit because we are horrible listeners. We are all horrible listeners. Even if you have training, there are a lot of circumstances where you are terrible at it. And I just finished reading a book by the lead hostage negotiator for the FBI. And they train their people on listening, listening, listening. And he admitted that when they're in the midst of a negotiation, they add 4 or 5 different people to listen because no one person can hear all the signals. No one person can digest everything and perceive everything. So it is a challenge. None of us are going to tell you that it's easy breezy to be a good listener at all times. How bad are we? Well, this was a great study where they divided people up into groups of 3 and asked them to have a series of conversations for 5 minutes. 2 people talked to each other and 1 person was an observer. They had their 5-minute conversation. Then they had another activity for 20 minutes. And then within the hour, they were asked to recall what they talked about in the 5-minute conversation. And if you looked at, if I'm the person that I was one of the speakers, I could only remember on average 23% of what we talked about. If I was an observer, I averaged understanding and recalling 12%. So we don't recall well either. The other interesting thing about this study was they looked at where in the conversation a particular idea or concept was, and how does that affect how well we remember. And the very first things in the conversation, the first couple of ideas and thoughts, the person listening directly could remember about 55%, the person observing maybe about 35%. But as you got through the topics of the 30 minutes or of the 5 minutes, our recollections go down dramatically. They pop up just a little at the very end. So people remember and maybe hear the first things that happen and the last things that happen, but mostly we don't recall that well. As we think about times when we weren't heard, what was the setting? What was the situation? Were you having a conversation with one person? Was it a group? Was it at the beginning of a very long meeting, or was it in the middle of a very long meeting? What are the factors that affect our ability to listen? We also aren't trained very well in listening. This was a survey of recent MBA graduates, asking them what's the most important communication skill in business. And I agree with their first 2. We need to be good listeners and we need to be able to ask really effective questions. However, they then asked, well, which of these that you just voted on are you good at? And what you see is that the top 2 that they said were the most important barely crack into the top 20 of what they can do. So what they're good at is talking. They're good at sharing information and answering questions, but they're terrible at listening and actually getting somebody else's feedback, which came in at 37. So as we think about the situation that we're in, we know listening is critical, but we aren't particularly good at it. And so let's talk about what's stacked against us. And you'll hear more about this from our speakers, but we feel crunched for time. We don't feel like we have time to listen. The pace of things, how quickly somebody wants something from you, is quicker than ever. If you're smart, you think quickly, in which case your brain is way ahead of what they're saying and you tune out. If you have advanced skills, there's a lot of jargon, which doesn't help other people understand. We have a zillion devices. You guys probably each have 3 screens, 1 iPad, 2 phones, and a computer. And I'm trying to say something to you. And it's hard for you to listen when you have all of those other distractions. Virtual meetings make it harder. The temptation to multitask is huge. And being successful is actually a liability. Think about it. You're a successful consultant in an area where you are an expert. What is it that you get rewarded for? For the most part, you get rewarded for accomplishing more, solving problems, taking action, applying the things that you already know, speaking up. None of those involve listening. But that's who ends up being successful, at least in many of the environments where I have worked. Expertise is also a handicap, because if you've consulted on the same topic for 15, 20 years, you probably already know what they're going to say, or at least you think that you do. You already have an answer that you can pre-prepare. And so you jump in, tune out, already have it all ready to go because you've seen it all before. So unless it's new and novel, it may be that you don't pay attention. Plus, we tend to not get better as we advance in our careers. This was an observational study of how often people in the workplace interrupt each other. And they started with the CEO, who is level E in this case. Level D were people who reported to the CEO. Level C was the one who reported to the people who reported to the CEO, et cetera, et cetera. So how often do they interrupt each other? Well, the entry-level people, 6 times an hour. Next level, 18 times an hour. Next level, 22. Next level, 25. The CEO, 31. So as we advance, we become less inclined to hear other people and more inclined to tell what we think to other people. So as we think about this, think about the example that you have in your worksheet of why wasn't I heard, or what made that circumstance unsatisfactory because people didn't hear? What level of person was supposed to hear? What level of person was speaking? How much of the dynamic has to do with some of these issues? So what makes us feel connected? Well, some of the things that make us feel connected are things like smiles and nods and gestures. So another study looked at the difference between in-person, video, audio, so like a phone call, versus text. What happens in these settings? Well, we have less of those things that make us bond with each other. We have less affiliation with each other. So what we are experiencing is we don't have as much of a connection, but because we don't have as much of a connection, we may not be inclined to listen and really respect what that other person has to say. So all of these things are working against us, including This is a landmark study, and I'm sorry I didn't put it at the bottom, but you can reach out to me if you want more information. There was a study that looked at what happens in ambiguous situations when you're not quite sure what's going on. And they attributed 7% of our understanding based on what word they used. Almost 40% based on how they said the word. And more than half based on facial expressions. So human communication is very complex. If we're leaving it to quick IMs on Slack, it's very unlikely we're going to understand and appreciate each other the way that we could. But when you do listen, I'll just give a couple highlights because I know you're going to hear a whole lot more today. But when you do listen, it matters a lot. When we go back to that study where how much did we remember of a 5-minute conversation, even an hour later? Turns out that if we use active listening, especially including paraphrasing, if I say, oh, Karen, that sounds like that was really important. That was a big deal. So tell me more about that. Then, depending on which study you look at, memory improves by 20 to 70%. And it helps both parties remember more because we have actually confirmed what we heard. Listening is powerful in how you influence other people. Influence is sort of the currency of how you go through the working world. Are people willing to pay attention to what you say? Are going to take it into consideration? So can you persuade people? Again, a lovely study that looked at influence on the left. And the first thing they looked at is how convincing and eloquent they are in how they speak. So are they gifted verbally? And as you can imagine, if you aren't very good at getting your message across, you aren't going to be as influential as somebody who is really good, very convincing, very clear in how they present their opinion. However, if you are a poor listener, even if you are convincing in how you get your message across, all of a sudden your influence goes down to about average. If you happen to be poor at expressing yourself and you don't listen, you're going to be near the bottom. But if you are a great listener, even if you can't express yourself eloquently, you're going to be at least toward the middle in how much you influence other people. And if you're good at both, slam dunk. So the contribution of that skill of listening is absolutely critical to how well you can influence other people. I'll just give a couple highlights on the impact of listening very quickly. If you are talking to somebody and you guys disagree a lot and you really are in conflict, listening as an intervention helps the other person get clearer, more aligned. They become more open to any kinds of mixed feelings that they have. And they often shift to a less extreme position. And this is true even when we're talking about really critical situations. And because this is the Health Enhancement Research Organization, listening is also a health intervention. When someone feels heard and acknowledged and understood, their perception of physical symptoms improves. They have less pain, they have fewer headaches, they have less tension, and that lasts for 24 hours. Their mood and attitude improve. They actually have measured that people who feel understood have fewer injuries. And the person who learns how to listen ends up reducing their own anxiety. So again, as we go through today, be thinking about all of these factors that we will cover that contribute to whether or not you felt heard. You can think about your situation and what happened and all of the ways that you could start to move it toward being heard. What happened and what could we do differently? So now I'm going to turn it over to Diane Bergeron. Dr. Bergeron will be sharing information to us about closing the loop on what somebody hears.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you. I almost feel like we could just end now and we'd be fine. Like Wendy gave us so much information. It's fantastic. One thing I do want to clarify, because, you know, Wendy introduced me with that lovely bio, and I would like to confess that I did not actually make a choice between tenure and going on a 2-year sailing trip. It was actually an unpleasant surprise once I got back. But having said that, I would make the same decision again. Like, you know, I think they kind of felt like, we're not going to give you tenure and, you know, you get to go on a 2-year sailing trip. So whatever. So I just wanted to clarify that, because that would have been very brave. And although I'd like to think I'm brave, it was not an intentional choice. So as Wendy said, my name is Diane Bergeron. I'm the Senior Research Scientist at the Center for Creative Leadership. And before I get into my slides, listening is one of my research areas, and people often ask me, you know, how did you get into that? And so I just wanted to share this personal experience I had. When I was actually at Case Western Reserve University, where I saw Bruce has an affiliation. So when I was there, we had one department chair, and then we had a new department chair come in. And this was someone that had been a professor in the department for a while. And she took over. And my experience with her, when I would talk to her about anything, it was just, I felt like, you know, this is the classic listening, right? Like I would go into her office and, you know, she would sit you down. She would move away from her computer. She had a different sitting area. And you were talking to her, and, you know, all the classic nonverbals, head nodding, eye contact, asking you questions, you know, there were no interruptions. And so, you know, it was like, I would have these experiences with her and just feel so fully seen. But what I started noticing as the months went by, as she was the new department head, is I would hear people say, oh, you know, don't talk to her about anything. She never listens. Don't bother bringing anything up to her. She never listens. And it was so disconnected from my experience of her. But then I noticed is that people were adding a sentence to the end of that when they said that. So what they were saying was, don't bother bringing anything up to her. She never listens. Nothing ever changes. Don't bother talking to her. She never does anything, right? So there was this role of action was coming up really strongly. And so that's a lot of my research actually has to do with action in terms of listening. And so that's one of the things I'm going to talk to you about. So let me get my slides up. I have 2 monitors, so just bear with me for a minute. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm assuming you can see those slides. And the way I'm going to do this is I will present my research, and then, you know, hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end. And I'm not going to be monitoring the chat. I think Wendy's going to be monitoring, so if there's any clarifying questions, but otherwise, hopefully your questions will be answered as I go through things too. So I really like this, you know, this quote by Dutton and Heafy. And so I'll just give you a second to read that. Okay, and so one of the reasons listening is important, especially, you know, coming from the Center for Creative Leadership, is leadership starts with a connection. And one of the ways you make that connection is by listening, right? And so that's one of the reasons that it's so important. So how can you tell when someone is listening? Wendy talked about that spreadsheet that was sent around in advance. And so I'm sure in the examples you thought of, maybe some of the things I mentioned came to mind about like eye contacts, head nods, asking appropriate questions, not being distracted, right? There's a number of ways we can tell that people are listening. And so I think, sometimes I see people trying to look like they're listening, even though they're not. And I'm thinking, people pretty easily can tell whether or not someone's actually listening to them. So, and I also really like this quote by Stephen Covey. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand, they listen with the intent to reply. And so I think Wendy kind of acknowledged this also. Like, if you think you know the answer to something, it actually makes it a lot harder to listen. So why can listening be difficult? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I think Wendy also went through some of this is, there's time pressure, there's social media. And I don't know about you all, but, I feel like I'm going through the world feeling like everyone is shouting at each other, right? And no one is actually listening is kind of how it feels to me. But there's a number of reasons why listening can be difficult. And so I'll just talk about some of the barriers is, one, when you're so focused on thinking about how you're going to respond, you're not actually paying attention to what people say. If you think you know the answer, or if you think you know what someone will say, that can be problematic. Treating discussion as a competition. So I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting, especially when there's some big egos in the meeting where it just feels like, all right, everyone here is just trying to, make points rather than actually hear what is being said. Distractions, I talked about that, like technology is huge in terms of being distracting. And I will say that I read a study where it was an experiment where they put people in pairs and had them sit at a table. And, I think they gave them some prompts of things to talk about. In half of those dyads, they had one person put their phone on the table, face down. Okay, so they weren't looking at their phone, but just the simple fact of having someone's phone on the table made people feel less listened to and like the other person was not paying attention. So, that's kind of an easy thing to just always have your technology away. But on the point of distractions, it's not even always external distractions, right? Like we can have these internal mental distractions also. Another one is words versus message, right? You might be hearing the words that someone says, but some of what Wendy showed also is we get a lot of information in nonverbals. And so there might be a different message coming through if you're kind of listening with your whole body. Getting defensive. Most of us, don't like to hear things that we don't want to hear. And so if you're kind of getting defensive, that can, you get flooded with emotions. And so that can impede your ability to listen. And then I think a final one is discomfort with silence. So many people just don't want to let there be some empty space. And so there's that rush to fill things when I actually think, in conversations I've had, often the most surprising and unexpected things come up when I just stop, right? Like I'm not rushing to fill it, especially after I've asked a question. So one of the things that, I always think is helpful is getting into a mindset for listening. And so just 3 things I'll mention here is, suspend judgment. And I think it's helpful, especially like Wendy said, if you're a smart person and you can anticipate what the person's going to say, assuming the person knows something you don't, or that you will hear something new. It can kind of be a way to pay attention. And I think it's moving into this space of curiosity. And there's more research coming out in the organizational sciences about, being curious is actually a really positive mindset. It's a way to kind of stay open and not prejudge things. Maintaining an open mind. I think this again goes along with curiosity. But the other thing is, if you don't think you're gonna hear anything new, then chances are you won't, because you've already made up your mind about that. And then finally, being fully present. I think one way to do that, especially if it's a really important conversation, is to find a space where you're not going to be distracted, away from technology, noise, things like that, but also kind of settling yourself in advance, kind of trying to ground yourself because, distractions aren't just external, they can also be internal, right? If you're thinking about, having to, I don't know, things that you have to do after work or a list or something that's weighing on you, trying to put some of that aside. So this is an article that was in Harvard Business Review that I really liked. And they have this acronym called WAIT, to think about in meetings, and it stands for why am I talking? And I just thought that was great. And, this links to some of the research that we're doing at the Center for Creative Leadership. My colleague, Andy Leugman, and I actually have a research blog, and it's called Chatterbox is in Charge, because we found that like just the fact of being in a leadership role, even if it's not like a formal leadership role, people tend to talk a lot more. So I think this acronym is fun. And then there was another quote in this article by the former CEO of IDEO. You don't know where the best ideas are going to come from. Don't let people's positions dictate how influential their ideas are. And so this actually links to something that I do research on that's called employee voice that I'm going to talk about. So, Wendy talked a little bit about the effects of leader listening. And I just want to clarify that when I use the term leader, I don't mean someone in a position of formal authority. Like, yes, of course, those people count. But at the Center for Creative Leadership, like, we believe anyone can be a leader in any moment, regardless of their position. So when I say leader, just, translate that in terms of that can be anyone. So when the research on listening actually says there's 3 dimensions of it. So sensing information, processing the information, and then responding to the information. So if we actually wanted to find out how well you listen, we could either ask your direct reports or your peers to rate you in terms of, I think it's like 10 items. So I'll show you the items to just give you a sense of how we measure listening. And again, the top items, these correspond to those dimensions of sensing, processing, and responding. So I'll just give you a second to read this. Okay, so hopefully you have some sense of those. And again, it's being recorded, so you can always go back to this. But this is how we would measure listening if we were doing a research study and you were one of my participants. So what we know about the effects of leader listening is, and this is where I talked about that we've done research on something called employee voice. So it's basically when employees speak up. So employee voice is when employees speak up with new ideas, when they identify a problem or identify a solution to a problem. It might be an improvement, a change in a process, an idea for a new process. And so these are really kind of micro employee behaviors. But what we know and why we care about employee voice is if you think about all these tiny micro behaviors of speaking up, adding up across employees and over time in an organization, they really do accumulate and add up. So what we know from the research is when organizations have more employee voice, it's linked to better organizational innovation, better organizational learning, improved decision-making at the organizational level, and then overall performance and effectiveness. So this is why, at least in management, employee voice is something that we study a lot. So one of the research studies that we did, we looked at, it was a few hundred people in 3 different organizations. And the path is that when a leader listens, employees feel psychologically safe. And when they feel psychologically safe, they are more likely to speak up. And I know psychological safety is, it's actually gotten a lot more attention in corporate. And I think it actually started being studied in a healthcare setting. So Amy Edmondson from Harvard was one of the first people to really study that. And so if you're not as familiar with psychological safety, It's basically, you know, when you're not afraid to be yourself at work, make mistakes, ask questions, take risks, raise problems, and then disagree with people. If we were, and so usually psychological safety, we think of it as kind of like a team construct, and that's how it's usually measured at the team level. So if you are part of a team, you can think about the extent to which you feel psychologically safe. And if we were going to measure psychological safety in your team, these are the things we would have team members rate. So again, I'll just give you a few minutes to read through these. Okay, and so the items that were, you know, have an asterisk, those would be reverse scored. But this is actually how we measure psychological safety. And we care about psychological safety because it is also linked to a lot of positive outcomes. So organizational creativity and innovation, right? Because if you think that you're going to get punished for making a mistake, right? That's almost the antithesis of creativity and innovation. It's linked to helping behavior. So helping behavior, kind of like employee voice, all these little behaviors where employees go above and beyond their job. When you add that up at an organizational level across time, kind of the same outcomes. We know that it makes organizations more effective, productive, you know, better revenue, more safety. So psychological safety is also related to better safety metrics. And this has been studied a lot in hospital settings with patient safety, medication errors, but also in factories in terms of fewer safety problems, and then even things like, you know, less waste in factory. So I already mentioned that psych safety is related to speaking up, process improvements, employees speaking up. And then the other thing we found in this research is, you know, that bottom path, leader listening to psych safety, just speaking up. The other factor that really makes an impact is whether or not leaders are responsive. And so that's basically the extent to which a leader responds appropriately and does something about what's said, right? So it's basically action. And so in this model, it's like psychological safety is the entry level. If you don't have psych safety, you're not going to get employee voice. But then if you do have psych safety, adding in a leader that responds, that's going to actually increase employee voice. And I think, like, you know, and I do want to be specific that I'm talking about listening in this specific context of employee voice. So there's something called the safety efficacy calculus, and it's basically like this mental calculation that people go through when they think about whether or not they're going to speak up, because there are a lot of risks to speaking up. And so one of the first things when people do this calculus is that they think about, is it safe to speak up? Because there's research shows that, you know, you use social capital when you speak up. There can be political repercussions, there can be career repercussions for speaking up. And so that's why that safety aspect is so important. And then the other part of that mental calculus is the efficacy, right? It's like, is anything going to change? Because why would I risk my social capital by speaking up if I know that it's not going to matter and have an impact? So eventually people just, you know, stop speaking up if these things are not present. So I actually think if you're not hearing any employee voice, if people are not speaking up, like, I almost think, is this the canary in the coal mine, you know, of a heads up of what is the level of psychological safety in your group or your organization? Because, you know, I mean, I've been in a lot of organizations, you know, it's rare that no one has anything to say. So if you notice a group that has gone silent, I always kind of wonder, okay, what's really going on there? So some other current research, and this is linked really strongly to that worksheet that was sent out ahead of time, is in some other research, we were looking at what makes people feel listened to at work and what makes people not feel listened to at work. And so in this research, we asked two main things. We asked people, you know, write about a time where you really felt someone in your organization listened to you. And then we had them write about a time where we really felt someone in the organization did not listen to them. And then we asked a bunch of prompts, like what happened, what did the person do? And then we also asked at the end, what was the single factor that most made you feel either listened to or not listened to? And so I'm going to show you kind of these graphs with the responses. I just want you to focus on the top line response. So that top factor is action, right? And so this was when people wrote about what made them feel listened to, in 80% of those stories, the role of action was present. So the leader had done something. And I'll talk a little bit more about what does done something mean? But that's what I want you to take away is look how prevalent action was in those stories. And then, but this one is even more amazing to me. So in the stories where someone said they didn't feel listened to, in 97% of those stories, no action was taken, right? And so this is where we started thinking wow, there's really something here in terms of a leader taking action. So then we decided to, so then we decided to do an experiment. And so in this experiment, we wanted to kind of manipulate, we gave participants vignettes about some workplace issue. Like imagine you went in to talk to your manager about this, here's what happened. And so in those vignettes, we manipulated how well the leader listened. So there was a vignette where, with a leader who did not listen well, maybe moderate listening skills, and then a really great listener. And then we manipulated across those vignettes whether or not the leader took action or no action, and then just kind of wanted to know, what's going to matter more. So these were the results. On the left, so the colored bars are the levels of listening. So the blue bar is a poor listener, the red bar is a moderate listener, and the green bar is a good listener. And so not surprisingly, in both of these conditions, right, the listening goes up and to the right. The better the listener you are, the better. But the bars on the left are when no action was taken. The bars on the right were when the leader actually took action. So this is what I want to show you, is people actually rated. So the green bar is someone that listened well, but took no action. The star on the blue bar is someone that was a poor listener, but took action, right? And so the employees actually reported they felt more listened to by the person that was a poor listener, but they took action. So if you're not a great listener, like I know Wendy talked about the importance of listening, and I'm totally there with you, Wendy. And I want to say, maybe this will make you feel a little bit better, because if you actually do something, then maybe you don't have to be such a great listener. Okay, so basically, it's not just how well leaders listen, it really is, whether or not you did anything with what you heard. So what counts as action? And this is where I want to be clear that it's not about doing exactly what the employee says or what they brought up to you. So when employees think about action, they assess action very broadly. And before I even say that, what I want to say also and point out is I've read a number of Harvard Business Review articles on listening, and I have never seen the role of action addressed. And I think it's because we have this mindset that people make an assessment of whether or not you listened in that moment. And I am here to tell you that it's not true. Yes, they do assess listening in that moment, but they might also look back 3 months, 6 months later. And if nothing happened with what they said, they're going to conclude that you didn't listen. So, employees, I think, tend to conflate listening and action. Again, so coming back to what counts as action, it's basically anything that moves the needle on what the employee said. So it might be asking the employee to do more research on whatever they are suggesting. And I was surprised in those anecdotes, it was amazing to me how many employees actually did all the background to figure out, is this a viable solution, right? They put in all that work and they really just needed the leader to kind of, give a nod. So it's not that, these are not employees just putting a problem on the leader, like they were actively trying to solve it. So asking the employee to do more research, it could be, okay, go explore this, right? Like put together a proposal on this idea, what it would look like. It might be putting that idea or suggestion as a meeting agenda item, right? Like if for employees, that will literally count as action. Connecting them with someone else, because maybe it's not anything that you can do something about. So maybe you have to escalate the issue, right? You escalate that issue, CC the employee, either with a person or a group of people, whoever can take action on it. Like all of these things actually do count as action. And so again, it might be, approving a financial or a resource analysis to see if this idea is something that can go through. So I hope that kind of tamps down what counts as action and doesn't make it seem like you have to do exactly what the employee brings to you. Because, so any action, towards considering the idea, like any step towards just taking the idea seriously counts as action. So action is not always possible though, right? And sometimes it's not desirable. Like maybe you just don't have the resources, whether it's financial resources or the time to do it. Maybe it's not a priority in terms of, strategy and priority. Politically, maybe it just can't happen, or maybe it's actually just not a good idea, right? Like sometimes you get ideas where you're just like, this is not going to work. So in those instances, what else can you do if action is either not possible or not desirable? So we found that research shows that when you give the employee a timely and sensitive explanation of why you can't take action, that helps and ensures that they'll continue to speak up in the future. When you can, in some way, just acknowledge the value of the employee's role and how they spoke up, and affirm that employee voice is meaningful. And even though you can't act on this particular idea, like it's still important to keep speaking up in the future. Can be expressing support or agreement with the idea. And then brainstorming implementation solutions, right? So again, and it might even be that you can't do anything right now, but it might be maybe in 6 months we revisit this. One of the things I would say is, share your decision-making process in how you make decisions about these things, because there's something called a mental model where if you're leading a group, right, like you might have a framework of how you make decisions, but if you don't share that with people that work for you or with you, it's like they don't know what to bring you or not. So if you can share that, there's actually something called team shared mental models, where when you share that, it's almost like it's a way to get everyone on the same page. And then, chances are the ideas that are brought to you are going to be more fitting because people will have a framework of how you make decisions about these things. Okay, so one caveat I do want to say, because I've mentioned that my research has been in the context of employee voice. So my caveat is action is not always appropriate in terms of listening, and that may come up in some of the other presentations today. But there are times where action is less appropriate. So Wendy had mentioned one of my other research areas is bereavement in the workplace. Like what happens when an employee goes back, and often with bereavement, yes, sometimes there are practical steps you can take to make the transition back to work easier for the employee, but often it's listening to validate the employee's experience, just kind of bearing witness to their experience. And I think in that case, we wouldn't be expecting action. Okay, so in wrapping up, I do want to just point people towards my organization's website is ccl.org, but we actually give all of our research away for free. Right now, it's on this website, cclinnovation.org, which I know is going away within the next 2 months. Like, I think they're going to try and put the research on our main page. But if you're interested in psychological safety or listening, this is a place to go. oh, sorry, yeah, this is the website. And actually, I already typed, so if you look in the top right corner of the slide, I typed in my name Bergeron. So if you want to look for any of my research on listening, just type in that slide. But there's two things I wanted to just say is this is a cool research insights paper, this leadership as a conversation. And it dovetails with some of what Wendy talked about, because we actually have this technology where we have people wear voice recorders when they do a leadership simulation in one of our programs. And we're actually collecting that data and analyzing the data, and finding some really cool stuff with that. And then some of the research I presented today, you know, Wendy mentioned this paper. So this is a research insights paper that you could also download from that website called Actions Speak Louder than Listening to Words. And I'll pass this to Karen and Wendy at the end. You know, we're always doing research on, this is a listening study that we have. And so I can send her this where you can sign up for it if you're interested in furthering our research on listening. And hopefully at the end of this whole session, you will be. And then I would say, go forth and listen. And then if you have any questions, we can take questions.
That was awesome. One of the questions that came in, and I think you answered it, but I'll let you comment one more time. The question was, at the team level, sometimes leaders don't have control over what of a team. They don't have control over changes that a employee is suggesting. And so I think in your definition of action, you said that it isn't just having to do that, but I just was curious if you had any other comments on that.
Yeah, no, so to me, like, I understand that we don't have exact control over things. So in that instance, I would say engaging with the person about the idea, maybe brainstorming, helping them flesh it out. And then can you escalate it to a different level and maybe CC that employee to show that, you know, you at least did everything that you could, and now it's kind of out of your hands.
Okay, great. You did just tease us a couple minutes ago with the findings. You said some really interesting findings for the leaders who were being recorded. Can you give a hint about what some of those interesting things are?
Yeah, so one is, you know, when I said that we have that research blog called Chatterbox is in Charge there. So there is something called the Babel effect. And it, you know, it is when you tend to be in a leadership position, you tend to talk more. So with that, we're looking at, and we're still like, we just started this project within the past year. But we're looking at how much people talk, the questions they ask, how that influences ratings of influence. And then we also are looking at even just pronoun usage in that, like, you know, how much a leader uses I and me, these individual pronouns versus collective pronouns like we and our, because one of my research areas are listening, bereavement, and then the third one is gender in the workplace. So really interested in that. And so we're trying to look at, like, you know, what is going on with women's leadership? And is there something happening where are there differences in behaviors, or are there differences in just perceptions of behaviors? So it's still kind of unfolding to keep the tension going.
You know, I mentioned the book that I read recently from the FBI negotiator, the hostage negotiator. And this just made me think of it. And I don't know whether this is coming up for you, but he said that if the person who took the hostages, the bad guy, spends a lot of time using personal pronouns, I this, I that, I this, then they probably weren't in control. And if they said we, then they probably were in control. And so it's sort of opposite of what you would think. So I was just curious whether that's anything that you've run into.
No, that's interesting though, because what I have seen is the use of I, a lot of the use of I can be related to narcissism, kind of as a personality trait. So I would even be curious when, you know, someone that takes hostages. I don't know, what do we call that person, like an abductor or something, but
Yes.
is that, when they say we, are they actually talking about them and the other quote unquote bad guys? Or are they talking about themselves and the hostages, right? Like, cause that
Oh,
different
yeah.
use of we could also impact outcomes.
That-
Yeah, that sounds
that's
like a
true.
fascinating book.
That's true too. Yeah, and for anybody who's not looking at the chat, it is Chris Voss and Never Split the Difference is the book. It's really fascinating. I really was listening to it because I wanted their take on listening, and it was pretty amazing that they believe you've got to really interact and listen to what's going on. So here's another comment. Pronouns used by leaders can convey shared accountability and shared success. So that may be a good thing rather than it seeming like they're taking credit for somebody else's success. So,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, and we're not like the way we have it framed is not that they're taking credit. It's more like this shared identity, right? Because when a leader uses we pronouns, it can, I think it's a sign of inclusion, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that can increase trust in leaders when they do that. I think, it's interesting because like in a political context, we can be different. Like we may be a political affiliation, but in the way that we study leadership, which is more generic, we view it as, an a signal of inclusivity.
got it. Got it. So we did have a question, and I'll let you answer, and any of our other contributors today, if Sonia or Rita, you want to chime in, and I can too. The question comes from one of our attendees who lists his height as 6'3". He's a bigger guy, and he worries that because he towers over people, eye contact may not be engaging but intimidating. And so he finds himself uncomfortable with eye contact and finds himself looking elsewhere. So I think there's a couple of questions. One is, do we think that if you tower over somebody, that eye contact is not as engaging? And are there alternatives that could be used instead? So I'll let you answer that, and I can see if others want to weigh in too.
Well, I'll answer it from the perspective of having a son who's 6'4". So when I talk to him, I expect eye contact. But I hear what you're saying, and I'm 5'10", so I'm not. But so I also sometimes tower over people, but I think at least for me, I think I still make eye contact. I think we have to acknowledge that eye contact is also culturally determined, right? So in some cultures, that could be looked at almost as a little aggressive. So at least for me, I also think about country of origin or culture when I'm making eye contact. And I find that sometimes I do reduce my contact. So I don't know if other people have a different perspective.
Yeah. Sonia, feel free to pop in here.
I don't really have much to add other than Jesse, I understand. I've received feedback. I'm 5'7", but I've been told that I have very intense eye contact with people. And I'm just watching them, I'm looking in their eyes, but it feels unnatural to me to be like looking around. So I've just, if I sense the person's getting uncomfortable, instead of staring straight into their eyes, I try and look at something else on their face. So it still looks like I'm looking at them, but not staring straight into their eyes if they seem like they're getting a bit uncomfortable.
Yes, I actually agree with that, because I think looking away from them or behind them can be feel like you're not paying attention. And so I often soften my gaze, what that means, it's like those doodles that you used to have to soften your look so that the picture would appear in the background. I don't know if anybody else remembers those, but yeah, Karen does. So I soften my gaze so that I'm not as intent, and I do look at different parts of the face. Rita, what about you?
So I have a slightly different take on this. I tend to have trouble making eye contact because there are people I think who are like me, they're thinking and like I'm I think in images, some like looking away. So I think there might be other ways. I think you've mentioned some of them, Sonia and Wendy, that you can indicate that you're paying attention, and it doesn't have to be constant eye contact either.
Yes, yeah, and
Mhm.
so we can paraphrase, then they know you're listening. We can
Mhm.
nod and they know that you're listening. But even just small verbal, uh-huh, yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
agree. Those sorts of things can do that too. So Jesse, hopefully those are useful responses. Any other, oh, here's a couple others that have come in. Any other questions? So Jesse says, I think people can feel the intention behind the eye contact. So if you're fully present and listening, then maybe that matters more than the height where your eyes are, which is true. I think looking at their forehead or between the eyes sometimes can work. And he was saying that maybe you could look at their face somewhere rather than looking at the floor. So I think that's a good suggestion. Any other questions for Diane? Thank you so much. I just love all the work that you're doing. I just think it is so great. Ron Getzel, what a question. What do you do if you're bored with the conversation? I don't know. I think get yourself more curious, I guess. But what about you, Diane?
Yeah, no, that it's funny because Ron, I'm with you. Like I'm sometimes that person, and that's why I think for me the mindset of curiosity. But the other thing is you can recognize your listening style. So there's actually 4 different listening styles. One is relational, which is kind of like the empathetic. One is critical, where you're always looking for like the flaw in the logic or the problem. One is I'm blanking on the third one, but the one that comes to mind for Ron's question is there's like a task focused, like time-based listening style. That's me. I'm like type A personality, often double A, right? Like get to the point, like so it can be hard for me to listen to someone that is meandering, and I'm with you, like I can get bored. But I have new empathy because what I've realized is some people form their thoughts and then deliver them fully formed. There are other people that literally have to speak out loud to know what they're thinking. And so when I'm starting to feel bored, I often think, okay, this might be one of those people that has to speak for a while and maybe go in circles to know what they're thinking. So then I just be patient. And I have more patience because I'm married to someone that does that. So
All right. Well, we are going to take just a 10-minute break. We will stop and we will be returning. I mean, we're not shutting anything off, but we will be back at the bottom of the hour. So you can go get your snack, go get some more caffeine, whatever it is that you need. But Diane, again, we totally enjoyed and appreciate what you gave us to review, and we have your contact information if we have questions. All right, thank you. All right, we'll give people another minute to finish chewing like I just did. All right. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. And once again, I want to hand it over to Sonia Looney and look forward to hearing what you have to tell us.
Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Hopefully I don't have chocolate on my face. Maybe some of you do too. I'm excited to share today about unlocking performance through presence. We've talked about listening. We haven't specifically talked about active listening. Quick little blurb of who I am. Thankfully, I don't have to go through this for very long because Wendy did it for me, but I have a pretty diverse background in sport, in a couple of different fields, psychology, engineering, keynote speaking. So I bring a diverse perspective from a lot of different areas, and getting to experience some of these things firsthand has been very helpful for me. So unlocking performance starts with mattering. And I'm going to talk about mattering in a few minutes. I can't see everybody, but how many of you have heard about the construct of mattering? Awesome, great. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about the science of mattering. Some of this will be new to you. Some of this will not be new to you. So again, turning on the curiosity mindset. We're going to talk about how active listening is a potent ingredient for mattering, and thread it through into how we can build a culture of mattering. And I've decided at the end, if we have time, we'll do the interactive listening lab just to make sure. One of the biggest challenges as a speaker is getting to share all of these amazing things, but then not having as much time as you would like. So in the chat, I'd love to see if, and this kind of goes along with that spreadsheet, of describing a moment when your ideas felt genuinely valued at work. And what contributed to that feeling? What did the person do that helped you feel that way? Let's see if I can find the chat. Or can somebody read the chat, read a few things in the chat? I'm not seeing it for some reason. Oh, there it is.
So for me, it's when people really acknowledge and reflected back in a way that I knew they understood, and took my ideas to other people is another one. I could feel that there was actual resonance and they actually responded. Anything else out there?
I'll share a time for me. It's when I felt like somebody else believed in me.
Yes, yes. MJ, who is leading the forum tomorrow, said that when Karen asked to have her run the forum on a particular topic, she suggested an adjustment to that, and it actually worked. So when somebody changed a behavior, when people followed up with questions, connected an idea to another project, acknowledged an idea, even if it wasn't actually used, hearing my own voice or my own words in someone else's voice. So yeah, lots of really good ones.
Yeah, these are great. And so there's going to be a follow-up question. And that question is, how did that impact your performance? Performance can be a multidimensional word, but in this case, we'll talk about confidence, motivation, well-being, and or the outcomes that you were put out. Whenever you felt heard, seen, and valued, how did that impact how you performed, or your ideas, or the outputs of what you were doing? More motivated. I figured out how to see the chat and my slides.
Yes.
More invested.
Yeah. I would say that I want to do more for that person. I find myself not just motivated personally, but so if you're listening to me, then the next time we work together, I want to actually achieve more on your behalf. People are saying I worked harder, felt better, inspired. I like that word.
Yeah, these are great. And I'll share, whenever someone said that they believed in me, it made me feel like I had more courage to take risks and to try new things, and that I actually had something to contribute. And sometimes we don't actually feel like we have something to contribute until somebody reflects that back to us, even especially from a superior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe you actually could do something that you never thought you could do because somebody suggested that you could.
So mattering is this experience of feeling valued and adding value, feeling that there's awareness and reliance and importance to you. And there's some key pillars of mattering. So mattering was first done in the research, discussed in the research in 1981 by Rosenberg and McCullough. And more recently, independently, Gordon Flett, who's more known for perfectionism research, and then Isaac Pilotensky and colleagues have been working on mattering in the last few years. And there's 3 pillars, and mattering is interconnected. So a lot of times people will focus on mattering in just one domain. So mattering exists in the self domain and in the other domain, and those two are connected together. Mattering is feeling recognized, feeling like people are relying upon you and that you're significant. So if just one piece of this is there, but the rest are not, you're not going to have the experience of mattering. If you only feel like you matter in one domain, which I'll talk about specifically what that could look like, then you don't quite get that sense of significance. So adding value, I pulled some of this from this book, How People Matter. It's Isaac Pilotensky's book. And in the context of this forum, we're talking about the other category, but I wanted to add both because both are important. So adding value to the self is feeling like self-efficacy. I have the belief in my ability to do something, which leads to having more confidence. Having self-determination, feeling like my needs are met, my autonomy, competence, and relatedness, that I'm intrinsically motivated. Adding value to others is being helpful, being engaged, having meaning and purpose in what you're doing. And adding value is one of the easier pieces of mattering because it's within your control and you can do it on your own. I'm going to just add value to other people. I'm going to add value to myself. The challenge is in feeling valued. So feeling value to the self, many people struggle with self-acceptance and self-compassion. In the other domain, you can't feel valued to another person without that personal interaction and without feeling heard and valued and needed by the other person. So some of these things we've already talked about in some of the great presentations before mine, but these domains are interconnected. So I think that that's something that's important to keep in mind because sometimes people will feel like they can add value and feel valued in the self domain, but they don't feel like other people see them. Or they'll feel like they're adding value and feeling valued in the other domain. An example is some physicians that I've done some work with. They say, of course my work is valued. Of course I'm adding value, but I personally don't feel like I belong. Or maybe they struggle with that mattering to the self piece. So that's just something that's food for thought to think about is in the people that you're working with, which domain is more obvious where people might be struggling. And I did some research with perfectionists and a lot of them felt like their work mattered, but they did not. So, and that's textbook of not having self-acceptance and self-compassion. In the workplace, there's a mattering deficit. Some of this data, some data was shared earlier. Feeling undervalued causes burnout. 54% of people feel unvalued. This feeling led to them wanting to quit. 30% feel invisible, and only 28% feels like their opinion counts. This is a great graphic that I borrowed from McKinsey & Company about how relational skills are so important. In the performance space, a lot of times people are thinking about what are mental performance skills or what are optimization things that I can do so that I can get more output out of myself or more output out of my team. And people will do all these different trainings to increase those things. But when it comes to relational skills, these skills aren't often as invested in as some of the others. And whenever you can see how sense of belonging, feeling valued, having care and trust, these things are very important for employee retention. So feeling valued is the piece that we're going to be focused on with mattering. There's adding value and feeling valued. So feeling valued leads to higher engagement and resilience and motivation. There's more profitability, and feeling valued is the one that requires multiple people, not just one person adding value and feeling valued in one domain. These are, I pulled these from the different pillars of mattering. And so whenever we're talking about listening as intervention, we're talking about noticing and listening. So helping people feel acknowledged, feeling heard. And at the end, we'll get into the second pillar, affirming and recognizing, because those are also part of listening. How many of you have heard of active listening or practiced active listening? Steve White. Great. this was something that came to my attention. I love that Wendy was talking about Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference, the FBI Negotiator, because that was actually the first time I had heard of, I don't even know if he used the term active listening, but he used the term building tactical empathy, helping people, even quote the bad guys, feel seen. And a lot of times when people don't feel like they matter, they do two things. They, number one, they feel invisible and helpless, or number two, they act out, and they act aggressive. So whenever you think about these hostage negotiators, that's one thing that they were doing. So what Chris Voss is talking about is, how do you listen in a way that helps this person, even if you don't agree with the person, feel seen? And that requires listening with real understanding for where the person is at. You don't have to, I have two I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, a toddler and a kindergartner. Whenever they're upset about something, I don't have to agree with them and let them do the thing that they want to do, but oftentimes they just want to feel heard. And so in the workplace, a lot of times people need to feel heard. As Diane said, action is also important, which we'll get to in a minute. But how can we help people feel heard? And active listening is a way that we do that. So I have this roadmap from listening to performance, and there's pieces in here that are missing, but for the sake of our time, I wanted to start with active listening, feeling acknowledged and seen. That leads to somebody feeling heard, that their voice is valued and that they make a difference. And then we feel psychologically safe when we feel heard, that it's safe to speak up, admit mistakes, and share ideas. And when we have the sense that we are feeling valued, we feel like we can add value, we feel like we can be more creative, and we feel empowered to contribute. And in the beginning, whenever I asked you guys for some of those prompts, some answers to a time that you felt valued or heard and how that impacted how you acted, it made you some of you said, I felt inspired. I felt like I could do more. I wanted to do more. And this practice requires pausing and not being in a hurry. And I think about even just like in the medical field, you have 5 minutes or 15 minutes or however long with a patient, or you have these calls where you have to get through all of these metrics, but it requires taking that time and building that tactical empathy, as Chris Voss calls it. So how do we do this? How do we become attuned to other people, having this shared understanding and connection? And that's through presence. And everybody's heard of mindfulness at this point. So if you struggle with being present with another person because you see distractions in your environment, or you're thinking in your head, maybe you're thinking self-conscious thoughts, maybe you're thinking about the thing that you got to do next, maybe you're thinking about a mistake you just made. That is a mental skill that we practice in sport, and also a mental skill that can be practiced in active listening, of how do we stay in that present moment? How do we let those things just go on by without grabbing onto them, so that we don't get distracted when somebody is trying to tell us something? How can we be intentional with how we show up? Diane talked about having a grounding practice before you know that you're going to have a conversation. A grounding practice could even be something like not being hungry. I made sure that I mentioned I ate some chocolate, which, that could be a performance enhancer because of the sugar and the caffeine. Making sure that you're rested and that you're ready to have these conversations, that you can be present with somebody. And then how you respond to people, how you respond to the things that they are saying to you, making sure that you're working on the skill. So today we're learning about the how of all the things, but that requires taking this and regularly practicing it. If you don't have the capacity to be in the workplace or at home, even like getting in a dyad with another person to practice these skills, you can do it with AI. This is something that I've experimented with using like a ChatGPT or something, and having a conversation with it, and then having it critique me so that I can get even better at working on the skill. Feeling heard was the next stop on the roadmap, and there's been some research that shows there are 5 key aspects to feeling heard: having a voice, receiving attention, having empathy, that people are matching you and understanding where you're coming from. And if you're not sure where somebody's coming from, asking these curious and clarifying questions. Feeling respected and that you're taken seriously, and trying to come to a place of mutual understanding. And again, a place of mutual understanding does not mean that that one person is right and one person is wrong. It makes me think of the nonviolent communication as using conflict and discussion as a way to deepen relationship, and not even necessarily to come to some sort of solution. Next up on the roadmap was psychological safety, and Diane talked about this as well, having the shared belief that it's safe to take risks. So feeling heard is the thing that leads to psychological safety. It's a major factor in psychological safety. And when people experience psychological safety, it's the number one most important thing in high-performing teams. And there was a study that I read where they used the feeling heard scale on a Likert scale. And when there was an increase of just 1 point on the Likert scale of feeling heard, there's a 42% reduction in burnout. So spending the time, the extra 1 minute to help somebody feel heard can not only help them perform better, but reduce burnout, increase their well-being, and increases performance. So how do we practice active listening? And I love that Diane talked about at the action level, because that's so key as well. So I'll give you an example in a moment, but number one, listening to the person, acknowledging the feelings and looking for the nonverbal cues. I loved some of that data that Diane showed, that the nonverbals were pretty important, or I don't know if it was Wendy or Diane, but the nonverbals, where they're looking, how somebody is breathing, their micro expressions in their body language. I was on a call kind of recently where I said something and it came out wrong. And if I wasn't paying attention to one of the people in the call, I saw her face just for a microsecond change. And that told me, whoa, I crossed the line. I didn't mean to. I need to make a repair here. And if I hadn't been paying attention to the nonverbals of the person and had the skill to make the repair, then I could have caused damage in that relationship and decreased the psychological safety of the group. So practicing active listening and just noticing other people, it isn't about being perfect. You're never going to be perfect at it, but it's about just being attuned to the people around you and being able to make those shifts and changes as you need. It's listening for the meaning in what somebody is telling you. So what are they telling you? The content itself, listening for what they are saying, but also what's the feeling and the attitude behind the thing that they're telling you? Can you pick up on that? Can you hear it in their tone? Do they look exhausted? Have you noticed other things about them with how they've been showing up, so that you can be more attuned to not just what they're saying, but what's behind what they are saying? And then there's also listening at the global level, listening to the big picture of the things that are said and unsaid. I think about this in marital conversations and disputes. What are the things that are not being said here? Or a thing that was said, what was behind the thing that the person was trying to tell me that maybe they couldn't voice? Everyone has different levels of emotional agility, and being able to express how you feel is going to be different for other people. And then last is the action. Is there something that you can do? Not everything can be fixed right away, but just whenever somebody tells you that they need something, finding a way to try to make them feel heard, and then at least let them know that you're working on it to try to get it done with whatever is within your power. Whenever you see them again, ask them how the thing is going that they were telling you about. I actually take notes whenever I have calls with people. I take notes about some of the things outside of the actual work interaction about the person that I can follow up with them, so that not only do they feel seen for the work that they're doing, but they feel seen for the person that they are. So like if somebody is saying, you're doing a work conversation, but then you mention like, well, what are you doing later? And they say, oh, I'm coaching my kids' soccer practice. Like the next time you can talk to them about the soccer practice. And that's a way that they feel seen as a person and not just for the thing that they're doing as a cog in the machine. So I'm going to give you an example of what this sounds like. So say somebody says, okay, I've been covering all of these extra shifts at work. We're understaffed. I'm working super hard. I'm starting to feel really exhausted. I'm not getting to spend time with my family. I want to help, but I just don't know how sustainable this is. They've had the courage to come to their manager to tell the truth, to say that thing. So when you're listening at the person level, you can say, gosh, I can really hear the fatigue in your voice. I can see it. And it shows how much you've been stepping up. I can see how hard you've been working. And then you can clarify. You're saying that this extra workload that you've been taking on is really wearing you down, and you're unsure how sustainable this is for you. And then at the global level, what I hear is that you want to keep contributing to the team, and it's really meaningful to you, but it's really hard to find balance. And then the action level. Well, let's talk about how we can redistribute shifts, or ask them, invite their input. What ideas do you have on how we can better redistribute this work or give you the break that you need? So instead of saying, we all suck it up, we're all working hard, times are tough, you can help them feel seen, heard, and valued just by that interaction. And so now I'm going to link everything that we just talked about to mattering. So these skills of active listening that lead to feeling heard is whenever somebody is telling you something, noticing effort and presence. I saw how much care you put into this thing that you're doing, and this helps them feel seen. Affirming their significance. Wow. Looking for their skills and their strengths that they're sharing. Your idea helped me see this new angle. I've already mentioned inviting input. Reflective listening, just saying back the thing that they said to you. I remember when I was doing my coach training a long time ago, we were doing work in triads. There would be 3 people, and you would have to practice the skill of active listening, and somebody would be with their sheet, like kind of critiquing for feedback to help you get better at it. And it feels so odd to whenever somebody's saying, gosh, I'm really struggling, I'm really tired, or I don't know if I'm able to do this. And you say, wow, it sounds like you're just unsure that you're able to do this. It sounds like you're being a parrot, but really what that does is it invites them to go deeper into how they're feeling. And leaving silence after the thing that you reflect is so important. Sometimes the silence can feel awkward because we're taught that we need to fill every single space, but that silence allows them to elaborate and to continue. If I'm feeling awkward in the silence, sometimes I count to 5 or to 10 to give me something to do while I wait. Because sometimes you can see on their face that they're thinking or that they're processing something. So giving the space before you speak up again. And then just acknowledging the growth that people are doing. And all of these things are part of active listening, and they help people feel seen, valued, included, understood, and they improve people's performance and trust and psychological safety. So if you are wanting to practice this in a low stakes environment, you can try it in your friendships and your personal relationships with a close colleague. It can be overwhelming to try to change everything at once with your communication. So pick one thing on this list and write it down. Take a Post-it note like mine. You can write it down that you want to practice today to bring this into action. I think the easiest one is reflective listening. The second easiest is affirming significance of looking at somebody's strengths and the thing that they did and just reflecting that back to them. So this is a listening lab, which if we have time at the end, we will do it. But if you want to practice this on your own or take this back to your organization, you can take a screenshot of this. But this is a way to practice this, and practice doesn't make perfect, but practice makes improvement. So if you want to continue practicing active listening, you can do that. And one of the hard things is not giving advice. In coaching, this is such a key aspect, is that you're not there to give somebody advice. You're there to help them, to guide them, to listen to them, to affirm them, so that they can come to their own conclusions, and then they can feel like you're there with them. And asking these curious and open questions, asking the how and the what questions can help. That way they don't just answer yes or no. And then you can do a debrief of what that felt like to be truly heard, reflecting back what the person did well, and just simply thinking and pausing, even in an interaction that you had with somebody, of what went well with that conversation. Something that you did and something that they did can bring more awareness and intention to these conversations that you're having, to increase your ability to listen and to communicate. And if you remember the slide with active listening, there was presence, intention, and response. So by pausing to reflect on your own conversations, that helps you bring more intention into the next, because you have more awareness around how you're showing up. To build a culture of mattering, how do we scale this? So we talked about mattering. We talked about how it's adding value and feeling value to the self and to others. We talked about active listening as a catalyst, as a thread that helps people feel heard so that they can experience psychological safety and take more risks and contribute more and feel more inspired at work. But how do you do this on a broader scale? And there are cultural norms that you can set that help people feel more comfortable talking about some of these things. Earlier, Diane was talking about, it was someone asked, well, what if I can't take action because it's out of my hands? Well, it requires psychological safety for that manager to go up to escalate it to the next level, to go to their manager, to even say, hey, you know, the people I'm responsible for, they're having problems with XYZ. Is there anything we can do? Because if they don't feel psychologically safe with even their own manager, they might not feel comfortable escalating what the person said. So creating these environments are so important. And actually, I'm going to take this second in the chat. What have you guys done in your workplaces to help increase this culture of mattering, this culture of psychological safety? What norms have you encouraged from everybody around you? How have you role modeled these things? This gives us some ideas that we can remember and feed off of. Give you a second, and then I'll go over to the chat. Making a habit of not talking over each other. Something I love that. I'm going to add something to that is when you feel the urge to interrupt, that's a mindful practice as well. Feeling like you feel like energy starting to bubble up, you feel like attention, you feel yourself holding your breath. So having something to do when you feel that urge bubbling up to interrupt, to help ground you again, can be really helpful. Yeah. Okay. These are great. Intentional time for one-on-one vibe checks. Leaders go last. Oh, great. Course. Hey, Jesse, great courses on this and other topics. Listening workshops. Encouraging leaders to ask for feedback from the people who report them. Yeah, that's amazing too, because that invites feedback, instead of it being this thing that people feel like they have to sneak around to do. Great, thanks for sharing those. The next, I'm going to go on to the second pillar. I'm looking at the time here. So affirming and recognizing. So the next slide is going to be about how we can affirm people. Sorry, I'm going to pause for a sec. Where I have psych safety, I've experienced colleagues who are open to hearing constructive feedback and also gracious about making repair when we have misunderstood each other. Yeah, these are great norms. Nobody likes receiving the feedback. And I think as the individual, when you're receiving the feedback, being able to stay open. I do a lot of work with athletes and resilience, and talking about the management of your emotions when you're receiving feedback is such an important part of this. So affirming and recognizing. How do we affirm and recognize other people? A lot of times people will just say, thanks, or great job, or well done, or, you know, in my case, you won the race. It's like, okay, that's fine, but that doesn't really increase connection. In fact, sometimes people will reject positive feedback. A lot of us can't even receive a compliment on our shirt without saying, well, this whole thing, like I bought it at the thrift shop or whatever. So how can we work on giving positive feedback to show that we are listening, to show that we are paying attention? So number one is describe the behavior. So I'll use Wendy as an example. Wendy, when you gave your presentation, it's weird to look at this. I'm trying to find her face so I can look at her. Wendy, when you gave your presentation earlier, I noticed how well you took complex topics and you were able to make them very approachable and understandable. And I still remember some of them. And that's going to really help me be inspired by how I give presentations in the future. That's a much different way of giving feedback than saying, Wendy, that was a great presentation. It tells them specifically the things that they did that helps them feel like they matter in a way that is beyond just like an external validation piece.
I like the first one.
Which one?
I like the first feedback better. Yes.
Yeah, so this is another practice. And again, I use the word practice because sometimes we can get really critical of how we're communicating. I also think about, Diane talked about Jane Dutton and colleagues' work and high quality connections. And there, you can put a lot of pressure on yourself to be a great active listener, to make high quality connections, to give great feedback. So just to be aware of how critical you're being on yourself, how hard you're being on yourself as you're trying to continue to improve at these skills. And that also increases mattering in the self domain as I am having self-compassion that this is hard. This is a skill that I'm going to continue to work on and that sometimes I'm going to mess it up. These micro behaviors scale up. So from individual to team to organization. When somebody feels valued, they show up with more energy. They feel like they have something to contribute. They feel, for me being here as an individual, I feel valued. I feel like people want to hear from me, and that helps me be better in the work that I'm doing. And hopefully there's a ripple effect of that. And when I go back to my team, it builds trust, and it helps you at the organizational level. If the individuals feel this way and the team feels this way and all the teams are interacting this way, the organization as a whole, the culture starts to change. I've seen this in some of my executive coaching practices. Is not only does this create this sense of mattering, but it creates a sense of collective efficacy, the belief that the team is as its own entity can do great things. And a lot of times in teams, sometimes you see this in sports, you see this at work, there'll be individual star contributors, and then you have the team. But when the team views itself as an entity, the whole team can perform better. And in that team space, there is more psychological safety. And a piece of research that I wanted to bring up earlier was about perceived social support. So perceived social support is such a big part of feeling heard and feeling like you matter. There are some really great studies with Olympic athletes where when they felt heard, when they felt seen as a human, they felt like people were supporting them more than just for being an athlete, but for being a person. They performed better. The athletes that were the highest performers had relationships at the center of what they were doing. And a lot of times, whenever we are performance focused, and a lot of times the KPIs, key performance, people are looking at metrics that are measurable, but there are intangible things that are harder to measure, or that maybe you need, if you only measure it if you're doing a study, that don't get the same amount of attention. So it requires kind of big picture thinking to look at how a culture starts to shift and how people change and how they communicate and how they help each other on a team when people are starting to feel like they're heard and valued and communicate in these different ways. So this is just a summary of some of the research that I cited earlier about how mattering and active listening improve people outcomes and business outcomes. Whenever you see this data, it's hard to say, well, this isn't worth our time. This isn't worth time doing training. It isn't worth the time whenever we start a meeting to highlight what's going well, what somebody is doing well, and how we can help one another. I created a worksheet in case, because we had to go through this really quickly. For those of you who are familiar with this information, the speed was probably right. For those of you who have, maybe this is new to you, it probably felt like drinking out of a fire hose. So I have a worksheet you can take back to your teams. I can give it to somebody to send out to the group if you guys want it. But I just have 4 different practices here that you can take to your next one-on-one or your next team meeting. And you can practice some of these things on a regular basis. And a book recommendation that I have is The Power of Mattering by Zach Mercurio. This book is amazing. It's about how leaders can create a culture of significance. And a lot of the things that I talked about are in his book. Really great resource. And he's an amazing speaker as well. So I just wanted to make that recommendation. And that's it for me. So I would love any questions and comments. I'm glad that we didn't do the listening lab because we would have definitely gone over. But yeah, I'm just grateful that you guys are here and that you're interested in listening.
Yeah. Any questions from out there? So I'm actually curious, Sonia, what do you get the most resistance about when it comes to talking, especially in the corporate world, about mattering? I mean, what do you hear from leaders who are reluctant? What is it that doesn't fly for them?
One is that it's hard to measure, and they say, well, like I have to report these outcomes, these numbers. And if I can't show that mattering is improving those outcomes, then it's not worth our time. But some of these things are hard to show directly that they're making that difference. It's hard to reduce it to one thing. And another is I've seen yeah, we want this. Mattering is important. Listening is important. This is great. But then not actually implementing it. So there's the knowing of the thing, and then there's the doing of the thing. And the doing requires, it requires time, and it can be really difficult to carve out even more time to focus on these things. But often it's a little bit of work out front. You have to front load it a bit, but then once people learn these skills, the modeling of it, the social modeling helps it move forward.
Right, right. So do you have experiences that you can draw upon for them where a group actually really embodied the dedication to listening, the dedication to feedback and mattering? Have you had those experiences that really bring it home for people?
Yeah, so an example that I have is in group coaching, and it's with a producer team in a financial firm. So it's interesting because whenever people are in financial planning, they're all individuals, but in some financial planning firms, they're also a team. And this could be similar to, you know, a legal firm or an accounting firm where you have the partners and you have all the people. So people are individually trying to do things, but then for the business, they're trying to do things as well. And so whenever people come together and we have these group calls, they would have these producer meetings. And in the past, they would never talk about the things that they're working on, and I would invite input from the team to help each other through some of the goals and challenges that people are facing. And being able to have these collective goals and individual goals where people can talk about this, it helps people feel invested in each other's goals. It helps people feel comfortable saying, gosh, I'm really struggling with this thing. Can the group help me? But it requires the time and the space to do that. So I was grateful when this company wanted to spend the time, and the CEO said, it's very hard to say directly that this is improving all of our our wealth and insurance numbers, but I can see that we are a completely different culture now because of these different types of meetings that we've had.
That's really great. So Jesse posted that he hears that older individuals, probably old fossils like me, think that these topics are really for younger people, you know, and I hear it's, you know, it's soft skills, you know, it's that fluffy stuff. And he feels like they wear their dedication and hard work as a badge of honor, even if it's taking a toll on them.
Mhm.
And so there isn't really a question other than, you know, make a comment on that for us, and how are you seeing that generational difference, I guess?
From a generational difference, I'm sure many of you have heard this. We'll hear, like, first of all, I will shout out to Jean Twenge's work, who's done amazing work on different generations. But I hear like, oh, the younger generations, like they are not as resilient. They need all this. They need more psychological safety than we did. They're not as motivated. I'll give a different comment that specifically speaks to Jesse's comment, is that I've done a lot of work on meaningful accomplishment and what makes our goals and striving healthy and meaningful. And a lot of times people have their self-worth contingent upon external things. So whenever somebody is wearing their dedication and drive as a badge of honor, chances are they're deriving their self-worth from their productivity and possibly their approval from others. And one of the solutions I have for this is having more self-complexity, having more places where you can derive your sense of self from other than just your work, which is really hard for type A driven people. Like I struggle with this. But whenever we start looking at the badges of honor that we wear, what is that linked to? And is this actually adaptive? Jesse said, regardless of the toll on their health and well-being. Maybe some people don't care about their health and well-being, but all of us here do. So like, what are the tolls? Asking those curious questions. Maybe it is worth it to them that they don't need that. But I think that in general, our health and well-being matters a lot.
Yes, yes. So we have one more question for you. Greg asks, how do you respond when leaders are losing their emotional radar when they're under stress? So similar to athletes who may not be able to hear tough feedback because they're right in the middle of the throes of what they're going through.
So Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing that when leaders are stressed, their perspective and emotional attunement narrows. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. That they just lose that emotional radar and that ability to pick up those cues sometimes, and obviously the effect on listening.
Yeah, I think coming back to why you are starting to feel that way and where that's originating before it gets to the point where you're not listening, being attuned to your body of, okay, I noticed that my I'm feeling tightness, I'm feeling my heart rate increase. I'm starting to think about what I'm going to say next. Coming back to one specific cue, it could just be as simple as focus, listen, like pick something for yourself that works so that you come back into the present and focus on the person. Even just recognizing, wow, right now my perspective is narrowing because I'm having trouble. I need to take a moment to take a breath. Whether that's you say it to somebody, I just need a second here, or you're doing it internally of just the awareness that you're even feeling that way can help. And then trying to take the focus off of yourself of how you feel and paying attention to what is right in front of you. And that's a skill, and you're not always going to get it right. Sometimes emotions run really high and it's hard. So I think that you build capacity over time in order to be able to sit with somebody, even if yourself, you are feeling stressed and maybe you feel angry with the thing that they're telling you.
So I am going to move us along. Sonia, thank you so much. That was a lot of wonderful information. And I know that we really wanted to cover the area of mattering, and you did a really lovely job. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right. So we're going to switch over to hearing from Rita. And I asked Rita specifically to share examples of how she has helped organizations and teams hear each other in a different way. And what you're going to hear is a load, a long list of examples, because I wanted her to give you a wide variety of things to consider. So, Rita, thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. And thank you, Diane and Sonia, because you really set me up well. My hopes is in what I share today is going to give different ideas and putting into action or achieving results or feelings such as like mattering and belonging. Listening to what everyone was saying today, I wanted to, before I get started, touch on psychological safety. What I'm going to be sharing today does require some level of psychological safety. And perhaps you don't know what degree you have, but doing some of these activities will garner, either create the safety or show you that where you're lacking and how you're lacking. So I'm not ignoring that part. Just wanted to say, acknowledge that. The work I do comes from this idea that maybe not idea, but that everything is relational. So I'm focusing less on the transactional and the relational component between all of us and everything. If you're interested in that and learning more about that, I would look up Nora Bateson, because we talked about data and how to measure. Is this successful or not? Is this going to matter to a C-suite person? How do we know something works? So she really talks about what happens in between the relationships between people and systems, and calling that warm data. And that's where I focus. And I think the other thing is some of the work that I do, I pull from my background in narrative medicine. So if you're interested in going deeper, that might be one avenue to start with. So, and feel free to put in questions in the chat, and I'll have Wendy use her discretion whether or not to interrupt or wait till the end. So I have to figure out how to share my screen.
Should be at the bottom.
Okay. All right. Okay, so, oh, and one other thing, because I'm covering quite a bit and I'll be going through it fairly quickly. Please feel free to reach out to me for any questions or to go deeper. In terms of the agenda today, I'm going to talk about story to lay the foundation. And then I'm going to talk about different ways, that we can get at listening: language, questions, images, fill in the blank, and then how to put it all together with the section on I heard you. Okay, so it looks like that. Okay, so in the chat, if you could put in one word, sentence, whatever you feel comfortable with. How do you feel when you take a survey or are asked to take a survey? So I see imposed upon, want to put it off. Will they listen? Guinea pig. Are they going to act on it? Does it really matter what I think? Not interested. It depends. It feels impersonal. And that's something I want you to keep in mind. Reading what everyone's putting in the chat, it does depend. And a survey, depending on how it's designed and how it's put forward, I feel a lot of times it can be transactional. I always feel like, well, that they want something from me, but what are they going to see me? So on the opposite end, what comes up for you when you review survey results, whether it's from a report that out in the industry or within your organization? What comes up for you? Interested, but always have more questions. That's how I feel. Trying to figure out what's actionable, not as detailed. How are we going to take action? Interested to learn from what it says. Yeah, so I think that is that can be common. Yeah, who didn't fill out the survey? What do they think? I think, like for me, whenever I'm looking at survey results, I have a lot more questions and I want to know more from the people. So with those two things in mind, the responses to these two questions, think about, keep that, I guess, in the back of your mind, the front of your mind, as I share examples of things that I have done, and some of them are inspiration, and maybe how you could design what you do differently, whether it's in a survey or separately. Oh, are people honest? That's another one. Yeah. Okay. All right. So first section I'm going to cover is story. This is the why. And the kind of the spine behind what I do and how I do it. And so I could talk for hours on this. So quick highlights: telling our stories builds relationships because we are actually wired for story. And it's also the easiest and quickest way to see the wholeness and complexity of a person. And we're wired for complexity, even though we're trained for simplicity. So that's something definitely want to keep in mind as we go through this. So I'm having trouble with my screen. I'm sorry. 1 second. So story thinking is a term from, it's actually a title of a book and a term that I learned from Angus Fletcher. Highly recommend his new book, Primal Intelligence. I'm telling everybody to read that. But in it, he talks about how story evolved even before language. Long before language, millions of years, in fact, hundreds of millions of years prior to words, gestures, and other forms of oral or visual communication. Story was running through our ancestors' brains. what were those brains using story for? What would they be creating narratives of if they weren't sharing information with each other? This can seem a great puzzle, but it's really not. Those brains were using story to do what brains do, to think, hence story thinking. So the biological use of story was unearthed at the end of the 20th century. There's a little bit more here, but I wanted to point out that story thinking occurs in the brains of adults, chimpanzees, mice, and even crows, and not necessarily close relatives. So it's important to understand that it is biologically very old. It is who we are, and as I said, it's how we're wired. So I like to start from the place of what is natural to us, which is story thinking. And then story being, which is when we think of story, we usually think of something that's crafted, like a beginning, middle, and end. But we are in stories all day long, internal, external, overlapping. So it's not something linear. And when we enter another person's story, we're somewhere in the middle of it, and not necessarily middle, like in the center of a circle, but we can be on the edge of this one. And then we're also entering in the middle of our story. So I think it's important to understand that it's not a closed system, it's not linear, and sometimes we try to understand people and what they want and assess things that way. So there can be a conflict. Okay, oops. All right, and then the last thing I'll say about story is that it's what actually carries our emotions. And I like this quote: the understanding that the key to story and to life is not rational thought, but emotion. It's not what someone thinks about something that spurs their behavior, but it's actually how they feel about it. I think we all know this intuitively. And as Dan Gilbert said, indeed, feelings don't just matter, feelings are what mattering means. So behavior drives what we do, and it's what drives that is emotions. Emotions are what make us human. So with that background, I'm going to talk about the prompts that I mentioned in the agenda, the outline. And really, prompts are could be anything that evokes narrative. So I'm going to go through my list of examples. And I'm a very much it depends person. So I design experiences, I design these prompts for given situations. So I'll share different ones. So the first one is language based. So there's story, then there's language, which is how we communicate how we're feeling, thinking, believing. And so this has a lot of things on this slide. So I wanted to share this idea of a lexicon map. And before I did that, I want to read this quote by Helen Sissou. And I think it's wonderful. She writes, to think that we have at our disposal the biggest thing in the universe, and that is language. Well, what can do with language is infinite. And I think we take it for granted that if we're both going to say, oh, let's talk about healthy behavior, that we think we're talking about the same thing. But is that true? So there's this, I think it was Ned Devine, or I can't remember his last name, but this quote, we live in wordshed. So at the center of me, in my world, I'm thinking about myself, my situation, environment, everything around me, and I'm sense making all of that. And around me, I'm using language to interpret the experiences, thoughts, beliefs, and actions. So this is like the whole of a person. And so a lexicon map is a tool that I created that really helps us understand the relationships between the words we're using, the themes, how we can make like groupings and collections, and help us go beyond with metaphors. And I've done this with individuals and also in organizations to understand, are we really on the same page with our mission and how we're living it? And do we even feel it? Is there resonance there? So what does a lexicon map look like? It's really two separate things that you pull together. And I'm using work-life balance here as an example to illustrate. It's what I ask people to do is list words or phrases, but usually just words that evoke or have the meaning of work-life balance. And, can use like a thesaurus, but whatever comes up. And this is not a one and done. I usually have people stay with this for a while and it becomes something they refer back to. So I put in some words here: balance, harmony, ease, flow, peace, integration, on time. This is a question I'm dealing with constantly in the work I do. It's like everyone wants work-life balance, but I don't know what anybody means. Comes up in surveys. And then the second part of a lexicon map is use your emotions, your senses, to think of experiences. And I call this column the adjacent words, to describe work-life balance. So I have a list here through senses. There's the texture of warm ceramic mug during a slow morning. There's where's that one? Lo-fi music playing in the background, the silence after logging off. So this gives a lot more texture to the phrase word work-life balance. And we really start understanding, especially when we compare along like different groups of people, what do they really mean? And then that can help with solutions on, well, what can we do? And so the third part of a lexicon map is really building the relationships and adding to each of the columns and going back and forth. And like I said, I've done this individually and as a collective one for an organization, and it leads to really interesting results in terms of understanding, well, what do you really mean by this term? And I think one of the ones that is common that I've focused on with organizations is the word communication. We don't communicate well. What is communication? We're saying a lot in that word, and the lexicon map is one tool. Okay, let's see. The next one, before we move off of language, there's this artist that I recently saw. I saw her exhibition, and her name is Christine Sun Kim, and she is an artist who's deaf. And so if you're thinking about language, I talked about how a word can mean many different things to different people, but then there's limitations. So this isn't necessarily an idea, but it's inspiration to help me think, I guess, deeper. And for all of us, it's like in English, there's what you're doing. Yep, I'm mistaken. Keep my cool. iMessage, WhatsApp, or what's up. I'm not sure what she meant by that. Not going to repeat myself. And in deaf English, it's a lot. For me, when I look at this, it's very clunky. And is it really getting across what she wants to get across? Or is she feeling that? And the same thing here. In the next one, the word finish is the only option for all these nuances, ways to say, no way, I did, stop, quit it, knock it off, too much, no. So again, I think the idea or some semblance of like going deeper with language can inform us quite a bit and help us learn and listen. Okay, so I'll end on language as a city to the building of which every human, it's got blanked out. Every human brought a stone. So it's a collective thing. All right. So next set of ideas is the using prompts that are questions. And again, these are overlapping, and so they don't easily fit into categories, but this is how I did it just for ease. So the first one is writing prompts. These don't necessarily have to be written, but I think the act of writing, and not I think, there's proven research that the act of writing itself pulls out more of what's in the subconscious, and you don't have to spend a lot of time doing this. The way I've done this in organizations is embedded in existing meetings, and and make it something that's integrated as part of a gathering as opposed to something separate. And what I've learned is that, well, what people have told me is like, for example, write the story of your name. Helped me realize, like, one person had said that in a group that they didn't even know what to write because they never really think about themselves. Another person had opened up a whole world for them. Someone else commented that this is my best friend, and I learned things that I didn't know about her just by spending a few minutes writing about the story of their name. Tell me about a time when you felt appreciated or received a gift can change the energy of a room and really help you understand what people are looking for. Let's see, I can say that doing this myself as a participant at the age of 44, so into the 5th decade of my life, is the first time I felt heard and seen. So if we talk about mattering, these are really powerful tools when you share and listen to stories. And again, everything that I've done with clients, individual and groups, is voluntary. But I think prompts are question prompts are very powerful, especially if they're open-ended. Another question prompt that I've done is related to this idea that maybe we've all had an experience of it when we were younger, where we're told to draw a picture of something and then we pass it around. And so the situation here is we're trying to shift perspective, understand a story, and come up with I guess, blind spots or new ways of doing something. So what we did was we had different teams with different prompts, and you draw one piece of it and then you pass it around. And when you're done, each team had 5 different drawings, and then each one would take a drawing and write a story about it, and then interrogate it a little bit and have these group discussions on what they noticed, what they didn't see, what they were surprised by. And again, there were question prompts here to help guide the conversation. So there sometimes is fear that I don't know how to draw, but the thing is, everyone can draw shapes, whether it's circles, triangles, lines, and you can put those together to do this. None of this took that long. But you get a lot of depth and richness in terms of understanding, hearing, seeing things. So different way of listening. And a lot of this inspires joy. And that goes to a very, what's the word I'm looking for? It adds a lot of cohesion in a group, because the joy and laughter and the fun together brings people together, gets them out of their stress state. So they're more open to listening, working together, that kind of thing, for effective work environment, including well-being. So moving on to images, something I tried at an organization was we came across the challenge that not everyone knows how to ask questions or come up with questions. So we threw out a whole bunch of images and had people write questions down of what they had of the image. And we used those in other situations. So it wasn't an even matchup, but it helped them to get thinking. So we can't always have a prompt engineer, but we want to develop a culture where people are curious and ask questions, and the questions can lead to other questions. Again, this is a fun exercise. It got people open and thinking. The other way that you could do this is you can have images and have people respond to them, whether it's in a short story, bullet points, and that also is another way of listening and understanding an environment. Let's see. Oops. Okay, so in pictures, going back to the artist, Christine Sun Kim, you can tell I was really moved by her work. We ask people, especially in surveys, to either rank things or check off things that matter, but we don't always know, like, to the degree or what in relative to each other. So here, I like the idea of just really rough pie charts that people can draw. And in an image, they can relay and you can hear why people are doing things or what matters most. So this is like why my hearing daughter signs. And it's mostly because it would be lame if she had her dad do it. And then I blew up on the right side some other things. You know, my sister is also deaf, so we can share family gossip. And I think it's very insightful, and it helps me understand this person more. And it's a very simple thing to do, and tells a story. I think it tells a really good story. So another one, and I think this would be a good one for burnout, is the same artist. Is like she was expressing her emotions. A little funny. She's talking about rage and being a deaf artist. How does she feel in different situations? I like how she brought geometry in. But if we were talking about stress, back to work-life balance, work stress versus not work stress, like I think this, having people just draw this out, make little charts, would add a lot of depth to their narrative and what we would be able to then do for people. Okay. Okay, so the next couple examples are what I call fill in the blank. These happen to be my favorite. So the first one is this idea that there's this well-being circle. A lot of times, or dimensions of well-being, we just have a list of them. It's like, what if we asked people where they were on the scale, where 0 being the center of the circle and being outside of the circle being 10, and usually they plot themselves, but we also gave them options so they can write in what's meaningful to them as a way to understand them better. And you can do this collectively or individually. And I have an example here on the right of one that I filled out for myself and where I was at the time. And I filled in creativity, safety, and spirituality as my other 3. Next example, this was very powerful. This was actually giving people a story that wasn't finished. This particular situation was a meeting with senior leadership at a hospital with a family member of a patient who had died. And the family member really wanted to be heard about what happened with their mother. And so we gave everybody the first part of the story and had them finish it. We had them come to a meeting with the family member, and people shared how they finished the story, the people who work there. And then the actual person, the family member, shared what happened. And it was really good exercise in listening, but also understanding perspective. Because I think that is the one thing that we forget about, is that we're all coming from different places, and that goes back to the lexicon map again. So this is very powerful, and it doesn't have to be such a heavy topic, but it's a very, I think, a simple way. And this could actually be done in a survey, like an open-ended question, and really mining what comes back is interesting. Okay, and you can, same group of people, we did a Mad Lib, I've called it Hospital Libs, and to understand perspective from a patient's point of view, we had them fill in each of the blanks and gave them some guidance. Caveat, most people don't know what an adverb is, so so then the next one, so this one was about changing perspective, but more so for themselves. So I worked with a group of people, nurses that were, I think the proper term is application, applying for magnet designation. So I did a lot of work around storytelling and getting to the core of perfection, excellence, that type of thing. And this one was about how to shift circumstances and barriers into opportunities. So it was the if only and then and then they didn't necessarily always match up, but it opened up people to think about things differently. With a different frame of mind. It's like, oh, what if everything was already great? Now, then I would do X. Okay. This is one of my favorites that I did that I believe evoked the most. This is another fill in the blank where we did a wall where people filled out why they're joyful or why they are feeling worried. It was usually, I think we've all been to conferences and there's vendors and you walk by fairly quickly. You stop at the ones you're interested in. And what was interesting here, it was a busy hallway, a hospital system. And so you have patients, you have doctors, you have nurses, you have the admin staff, everyone has somewhere to go, everyone is rushed, and everyone's carrying a lot. And what I found was that everybody stopped. And I think part of it was unusual, it looked different, but it was handwritten. So I think that was a key part of the listening and hearing. Not everyone contributed, but a lot of people stopped to read. So there's this sense of connection that happens when you're just listening. You don't necessarily have to be sharing. It's really gave people a voice in an anonymous way and a safer way. And it highlighted some issues that could be addressed. So like understanding, like, oh, where could we do things better? What's working, what's not? And people also use the board to give shout outs and praise other people. And
so Rita, let me just ask you, remind me what the prompt for this was. I mean, what was the request to you, or what was the situation that resulted in this approach?
it was more about sentiment. Trying to I'm trying to think back for this particular one. It's like we want to understand what people are feeling and thinking. And so, so much of the work and all of this goes into like, well, what's the right prompt?
Right.
And so, which is why I said it depends. So it's like, well, is there anything that is giving some sort of sense of lightness, hope, joy? So we came up with that. And then we didn't want to, as much as we wanted, we wanted to reduce harm, like the whole I'm worried about, like, so like, what's the word? And we landed on worried. We wanted to see what was on people's minds.
Yeah.
And so, and like from different perspectives. So including the community was very important. This is why it was in a public space. And so it wasn't just soliciting, but it's like for other people to see what is happening in a way that was organic.
Got it.
And so key part of this was observing how people behaved too around it.
And so it could have been a survey. I mean, a simple thing would be, can we just do an engagement survey?
Yeah, you do an engagement survey and you ask the same 2 questions and then you ask, who are you? But the information is the data really is completely different.
Yeah.
And it would make it much harder to listen to. Or act on.
Yes. Right.
And
So
I mean,
if you rated joyfulness on a 1 to 10 scale, that wouldn't quite be the same.
Yeah,
Okay.
and like what people said earlier, it's like, well, I have more questions now. It's like, well, what does that really mean? And that's where I was sit. It's like, well, what does that really mean? And so a lot of this is when you think about prompts, they're invitations. So what is the invitation you're making, and what's the conversation that you want to be in? Probably should have said that in the beginning.
That's okay.
Yeah. And I wanted to really talk more about that last one with the board, because I would highly recommend looking up Candy Chang. I believe her background is in urban planning and design. She's a very well-known artist. She was a TED fellow. I think she has a TED Talk too. She must. And so she did a lot of stuff like this in New Orleans and other locations. So her website has all the different installations. But in this one, it was just like, what do you want at this location? And this turned into something that Nextdoor.com then took ownership with, and they did it in a lot of different ways. Like, what do you want to see in this neighborhood? And a lot of people write down what they want to feel. Another one that she did was she handed out these like name tags, but instead it said, "I wish this was," and it was it was a space, like a building that was abandoned, and people wrote what they would want it to be, and it led to some action in the community. But I think, again, if you were to do a straight survey, I don't know if you'd get the same depth and type of information, and also that people really felt a part of it. Again, the nature of typical surveys is very transactional. It's like you feel kind of objectified sometimes. And then this one, I'm pretty sure a lot of you have seen, is the one she became famous for. It's the Before I Die, and they're all over the world. It's like people write "before I die," and then whatever comes after that. So I feel the fill in the blanks are a very powerful ones and a really easy way to get started. And you can implement it in a lot of different ways. So how do you tell or show people that you've heard them? And like I mentioned, the story is, quote, "the royal road to the study of relationship. What is important in a story, what is true in it, is not the plot, the things, or the people in the story, but the relationship between them." So how do you put it all together? Word cloud. We've seen these, we've done them ourselves. So this particular one is from the lexicon map that I did with an organization about their core values. And it led to a deeper conversation once they saw, like as a visual, what was big and what was not. So that's one way. Another way is I have a very diverse, varied background like Sonia, but different things. And so one of the things is I'm a CPA, I've worked in public accounting, and I feel the annual report is a missed opportunity. So how do we take numbers, which essentially is data, which essentially are symbols, they're containers of our stories, and redo an annual report in the words of the people in the organization? So this is an example of an organization I worked with for 3 years, the hospital system, and we had the annual report organized in ways so it could be read in 5 different ways, front to back, by looking at people's, the story contributors, the numbers. So instead of a table of contents, we had by the numbers, by location, where do they happen, and then by the core values. Some selected stories, like this one is like, process improvement cycle, very common, very clinical sometimes. But what I like about the person who did this, the way they wrote their story, they talked about what they felt and what they did. So the emotion, highlighting that was very important here. This one looks very dry, but told from very different perspectives on what it means to be able to walk again. And what it took was like what all the parts that everyone played had a huge impact. This one is the one where it was a group effort, and just illustrating it this way as more like a comic strip graphic novel really connected people together. And this is a core value one. Anyone who has experienced been through cancer treatment or knows somebody, and when they're done with it, there's usually a bell that people ring. So this was someone who worked in the reception area and told their story about it. And I think it meant a lot to the people to have their story be seen, but it meant a lot to the community to be connected this way. So there are a lot of after effects to organizing a report this way. But I think I'm coming up on time. And what I will say is if you can take something from here, think about what your prompt would be, what your invitation is. And all this comes back to something we already know. I learned the term last week, it's looping. So the manager walks around and talks to people, asks them how things are going, gets to know them, actually does something about it, taking action, comes back, what else I can do. So you don't need a vast amount of data. You just need to think about the prompts and what you're engaging with people and how you're engaging with it. Sonia touched on this. All of this can lead to more inclusive, psychological safe, trust, sense of belonging, higher performance, greater creativity, all of that. And I'm going to leave you with this quote. Could a greater miracle take place than for us to look through each other's eyes for an instant? By Henry David Thoreau.
Wonderful. So yes, you covered a lot of ground, which is so awesome, and gave us a lot of different ideas of ways to do things. What I notice is, and you can correct me, but essentially what you do is, rather than make assumptions about the things that we should ask, you pretty much eliminate those assumptions and redefine the exercise as having other people define
Yes.
what it is that they want to say, rather than us defining what we want to know from them. Is that
Yeah. Yeah,
sort
because
of there too?
that's exactly it. It's like, I don't want to assume because I don't know you. I am not inside of you, and you may not even be aware. So it's like, what it really is like entering the middle of a conversation. And there's no set outcome yet. We're going to see what happens by being together.
All right, and I know we've got to close, but one other quick question. How would an organization or a person in this group know whether their organization might be right for doing something that is this way, that is unique and creative in this way?
Well, I think I would start by asking, are they open to doing an experiment? And if so, do it with a small group of people and experience what happens. So, so the answers to those questions will guide you. Yeah.
Got it.
Because that's how I started. I mean, really, it's like, what are our big issues? It was turnover, teamwork, and all of that. And it's like, okay, well, let's, try experiment with a little different approach with a small group of people, get their feedback and see what happens. Yeah. And again, people can reach out to me if you want a deeper answer or different questions.
Great, great. All right. Well, thank you so much. That was awesome. And it did just exactly what I was hoping. So, and my thanks to Diane and Sonia. It feels like it's been a lovely 3 hours full of great ideas and real insights. So, Karen, I will hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Wendy, and ditto. Thanks to Wendy and Diane and Sonia and Rita for this packed 3 hours. But I am confident that our hero members and our guests who are with us today have multiple takeaways that they'll be able to use to take back to your organizations. I think you've all clearly demonstrated the business imperative for listening, getting more greater attention in all of our organizations on a regular basis and at all levels. So thank you for your time. Thank you also to our annual sponsors who make all of Hero programming possible: WebMD Health Services, Mercer, Meritive, and Marathon Health. Thank you so much for your support. And I want to welcome 3 new individual members. In July, Hero implemented an individual solo expert membership category for those who are in single consultancies, independent researchers. And so we welcome Jessica Grossmeyer, Bruce Sherman, who you met earlier today. Bruce was our first joiner as the new individual member of HERO, and Jennifer Wright with Will Wright Consulting. For those of you who are guests and have gotten a little taste of what it's like to be part of the HERO family, I would love to have conversation with you about what HERO membership means, what it costs, what it provides. We have organizational members and our new individual membership category. Next up, tomorrow, we have a full day of HERO Forum with Chair MJ Shah on From Incivility to Kindness, the Business Imperative. If you are registered, you will have already received a link. If you registered today, I know some of you did, you'll receive the link by the close of business, by the end of today, not close of business, the end of today. So watch for that. It is a different Zoom platform, a little more reflective of what it would be like to be in a conference lobby and go into breakout sessions, et cetera, because we do have general session keynotes starting off at 10 a.m. Central Time. And then we will have an afternoon full of breakout sessions, 9 breakout sessions, in fact, in 3 one-hour blocks. So I hope to see you there tomorrow. Then in October, we will have our virtual university summit on managing change and navigating uncertainty in higher education. There is a link on our website to sign up for that. And then you think tank members, stay tuned. So we will be closing out with a 4th think tank meeting for the year. We will have had 4 think tank meetings for our HERO members this year. And this one will be chaired by Dr. Jennifer Posa on perspectives from the C-suite on value, data, and the future. So we're going to be hearing from C-suite leaders across the C-suite and tying in some real actionable takeaways on how to connect KPIs with health and well-being. So HERO members can watch for that. HERO members can also expect to see recording of today's convenings added to the HERO Hub in the next several days, probably no later than next week. So you can watch for that because there was a lot of information to unpack. And I know you, like I, will want to go back and re-listen and begin to digest a little further. Thank you so much for your time. Please remember to complete the survey when you exit the meeting, especially if you are wanting to receive credit through InCheck for CHES or MCHES. The survey is mandatory for that, and HERO will submit. And if you request a certificate of attendance to submit to other accrediting bodies, that is also an option. Thanks again. I hope to see you all tomorrow. Until then, we are adjourned.
Bye-bye. Thank you.